Alright guys, welcome to our new unit. Now hopefully before you start doing this you have already taken our Age of Exploration unit test. If you have not, you need to do that very soon. I'm not going to leave it open for much longer. Okay? But we are in our new unit, so everybody, including those of you who are in Columbia homeroom, needs to make a new title page in your notebook. You should have a physical 5-subject notebook with you. Okay, so the title for our new unit is Early English Colonies. So go ahead and write that title really big in the middle of the next blank page. Shade the entire page green or whatever other color you like. It just needs to be one solid color. And if you want to draw pictures on it, you can. We're going to be talking about stuff like Roanoke and Jamestown and Pocahontas. We're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff in this unit. After you make these new title page, you need to go ahead and make 2 new bell ringer pages. Just turn to the next couple of pages after the title page and write bell ringer at the top. And this will be where we put all the new bell ringers for this unit. So here we have the bell ringer for the dates at the top of the screen. Hopefully you've already done this. If you have not, make sure you do it soon. But the question was, if you had the opportunity to move to a brand new planet that we had just discovered, do you think you would do it? Thinking about all the different things that could go wrong, how far away it is, would you be able to visit family very often? Would you be able to talk to them? Would there be internet service? Would you have to build your own house? Would you have to start your own farm? There are all these weird new alien plants and animals that live here and other aliens. Would it be safe enough for you to feel like you could live there, or would you want to wait until other people had kind of settled it for you and then you would go? And the other question was, what would it take you to convince you to go? Would they have to guarantee like protection? Would they have to guarantee internet access? Would they have to guarantee like a house would already be built for you? What would it take to convince you to go? So the first colony we're going to talk about is Roanoke. This is going to be America's oldest cold case in our history. So this is one of those times in history where I present a topic to you, and you guys have to try to figure out what you think happened after I show you all of the evidence. So, English colonies, we kind of started talking about these on our 3 main exploring countries chart that we filled out in the last unit. But the English colonies are going to play such a huge part in our history that they're going to get a unit all to themselves. So the word colony is a really nice vocab word to know, so make sure if things are underlined that you're highlighting them in your notes. A colony is a place settled at a distance from the country that controls it. So England is all the way on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean from North America. And so any territory they claim in North America, because it's so far away, it is called a colony. It's not considered really part of the country. It's like a very, very far away territory. So England has 2 main reasons for why they are exploring. The first one is raw materials, and the second one is religious freedom. Raw materials, and I kind of talked about this in the last unit, is anything that has not been turned into a finished product yet. So if I wanted to make a chair out of wood, what I would need for my raw material would be a tree that I go out and cut down, and that would be my raw material. Or if I was going to make a shirt, my raw material would be the wool that I got from a sheep to turn into a piece of clothing. And then religious freedom. After the Reformation, it was pretty easy for anybody who wanted to kind of start their own church. If they didn't agree with the Catholic Church, or in this case, if they don't agree with the Catholic Church or the Church of England, then they can just go off and start their own church. But it's a little bit hard to do when all of your other neighbors are one religion and you're something different. And so most of the time, these people, to try to avoid kind of some persecution, would come to the New World and just start their own town where everybody kind of believed the same things that they did. So coming back to Roanoke, things are going to get a little spooky. So Roanoke is the first English colony. It's the first one that England tried to create here in the New World. They've claimed some territory, but unless you have people living in that territory that you control, you don't really own it. For instance, Mr. Lee is right next door to my classroom, And I can say I own his classroom and I control what happens in it, but unless I have students in there that I'm in charge of, I don't really have much of a say in what goes on in his classroom. He's the one who's in charge. But if I did send some of my students over into his room, since I'm in charge of those people, I would have some say. So England can say they own territory over here, but until they get people to live here, it's not really theirs. It's just kind of some land that they say they own. Sir Walter Raleigh is one of these English explorers that get sent out. He is Queen Elizabeth's favorite. Now, this is the same Queen Elizabeth we talked about when we talked about Henry VIII. This is his daughter. Sir Walter Raleigh, this is him right here. He is kind of Queen Elizabeth's favorite at the moment. He's just very charismatic and very successful as an explorer. He's traveled all over the world, and he convinces her to give him permission to go to North America and claim some land on behalf of England. And she is very excited about that because she's seen all the wealth Spain has been getting from their exploration, and she wants to see if she can get some of that for England as well. So Roanoke, attempt number 1, and since I'm calling it attempt number 1, you can probably guess how well this is going to go. So 1585, Sir Walter Raleigh sends 100 men to an island off the coast of North Carolina. Now, it's all guys in this colony. They're not sending any women or kids or families. They want to try to get things started first and then bring families over later. And the natives in the area called this island Roanoke, so that's what they called the colony. This guy right here is named Sir Francis Drake, and I'll tell you his story really quick. He is what is called a privateer. A privateer is a type of pirate, which is my favorite thing to talk about in history. Privateers were like pirates that were hired by the government to be pirates. They would give you a piece of paper called a letter of marque, and it was basically a permission slip from the government to be a pirate. It would say something along the lines of the king or queen of this country is giving this person permission to attack these ships from this other specific country. And Francis Drake, before he became an official privateer, was just kind of attacking Spanish ships anyway and stealing the treasure off of them because Spain had so much treasure anyway. I mean, were they really going to miss it? It turns out they did. King Philip of Spain wrote a letter to Queen Elizabeth saying, hey, this guy who you're in charge of is attacking our ships and stealing our treasure. You need to arrest him and even better execute him for this, because otherwise we're going to declare war on you. And Queen Elizabeth has lived her life in such a way that no one gets to tell her what to do. She never got married, never had kids, because if she ever got married, she would no longer be in charge of England. It would be her husband, and she would have a lot less power. So that's the reason why she never got married. And so now this other king from this other country is trying to come in here and tell her what to do. And so she calls Francis Drake into the throne room, and she has a sword in her hand, which makes Francis Drake very nervous. And she tells him to get down on his knees, and she makes him a knight, and tells him if that king of Spain thinks that he can tell me what to do, he has another thing coming. I'm giving you exclusive permission to attack any ship from Spain that you want to, which just infuriated the king of Spain. So Francis Drake is sailing around the ocean, doing his privateer thing, attacking Spanish ships, and he's kind of over near North Carolina. And it figures, since I'm already over here, I should go check out that colony that they set up last year. It's been a year since Roanoke was set up, and he wants to go see how things are going, because this is like a new thing in history, and he wants to see what's going on. And when he gets there, every single person is starving. They've run out of food. They've been out of food for a while. The natives are attacking them. They're all dying. And so he tells them, okay, you guys all get on the boat. We're going back home, because if I leave and then come back later for how long this trip is going to be, you guys will be dead by the time I get back. So he kind of rescues everybody who's left in the colony and takes them back home to England. So attempt number 1 did not go super great. So Sir Walter Raleigh decides that he's going to try again. So he asks Queen Elizabeth, can I have one more chance to do this? And she says, okay, but listen, if we do this, and if it fails again, I lost a lot of money on that last attempt. Okay? Starting a colony is expensive. I have to pay for the ships. I have to pay for their supplies to get there. And then I also have to pay for all the supplies that it takes to get a colony started. like tools and food and seeds and equipment. All that stuff costs money. And I lost a lot of money on that colony because it didn't last long and it failed. If it fails again, I am not going to pay for any more colonies. This is your last chance. So a lot of pressure is on Sir Walter Raleigh. And so he kind of looks at everything that happened in Roanoke, trying to figure out, okay, what went wrong? What needs to be fixed? And he decides, well, the first one, I just sent all men. I sent 100 men over to this colony. But what if this time instead, we also send some women and children? I don't think it's going to work unless there are families here. That's going to be what makes it work, because that's going to make these guys committed to starting a life here. So he sends families to start this new colony. It's about 117 people total, give or take a couple, and they're led by a man named John White. He is going to be the governor of Roanoke. And when they get there, he has his little baby granddaughter is born. His daughter and her husband have their baby as soon as they get to the New World. They name her Virginia Dare, and she is the first English child born in North America. So Virginia Dare is John White's granddaughter. Okay? So they get things started, and already they can tell they do not have enough food. Okay? They don't have enough food to survive the winter. They got there kind of late, so it's going to get pretty cold a lot sooner than they were expecting. So they don't have a ton of time to plant food to grow before the frost comes in and kills everything. So John White decides, okay, I got this. I'm the governor. I'm in charge, so I'm going to take care of this problem. I'm going to sail back to England, and I'm going to ask for more supplies, and then I'll come back. And to get there and back should only take about 3 months. What I want you to do now is go ahead and click pause on this video and click on the link in the description that says what happened next. And it's going to take you to another web page. It should open in a new tab. It's about a 10-minute video kind of explaining what happens after John White leaves and what he comes back to. So go ahead and pause this video, and I'll see you in about 10 minutes. Alright, now you should be back, and so if you've watched that video, and hopefully you have, it is very good. You know that when John White got back, it was on Virginia Dare's birthday. She would have been 3 years old. He told them he was going to be back in 3 months, and he didn't come back until 3 years later. The reason why is not just because he decided not to come back, is because the second he landed back in England, Spain and England decided to go to war with each other. And this war took 3 years, and Queen Elizabeth refused to send any ships to go help the colony of Roanoke, because any ships she did send out were going to be attacked by Spain, and all the supplies that she was trying to send would end up on the bottom of the ocean. So she said, we just can't afford to do it, and she refused to send any ships out for 3 years. Even after the war between Spain and England ended, it still took him a few months to convince a ship captain to carry him all that way. When he does get back to Roanoke, the colony has completely and totally disappeared. All of the buildings are gone, the colonists are gone, there are no bodies, there is nothing. The only clue they have as to what happened to these people is the word Croatoan that was carved into a tree. But we still have no idea what happened to these people. There are a lot of theories, like the obvious one, which is aliens. But there are a few other theories that have a little bit more evidence to back it up. And so I'm going to take you guys and walk you through some of those. And you guys can come up with what theory you think is best. Is it a combination of some of them? What do you think happened to Roanoke? According to some accounts, there is some suspicion that the chief of a local tribe called the Powhatan tribe killed everybody in the colony. That was kind of the popular theory while John White was still alive, which is a very sad thing to think, that your 3-year-old granddaughter and your daughter and her husband were just all massacred by these people after you left. But there's not really any evidence to support that, because again, there are no bodies, there are no weapons lying around, there's nothing. There was just this big wall around where the colony should have been, but there were no buildings, there are no weapons, there are no tools, there are no people, there's just nothing left. It was completely grown over. Another theory is what is called the Dare Stones. So the Dare Stones were these series of 48 different rocks that have these different messages claiming to be from the people who survived the colony of Roanoke. And they were discovered over the course of about 3 years, and they tell like this really like crazy story. Most historians are pretty sure it's a hoax, it's not real, except for maybe the first one, which might actually be real, because we don't have a way yet to prove whether or not it's fake, or if it's true or not. This is still just a theory. So this very first stone that we're kind of playing around with the idea of maybe this is true, maybe not, who knows? It was found by this guy from California named Lewis Hammond, and he showed up at this university in Atlanta one day saying, I found this rock off of Highway 17 in North Carolina while I was like walking around the woods, and it's kind of weird. It's got some writing on it, and so he gave it to them. And these professors were like, huh. And so what they did, because the stone was really old and the engravings and the words that were carved into it were kind of hard to read, they took this flour and rubbed it over the rock, and the flour stuck inside the carvings. And so that made the words a lot easier to read, and you can see them here. So this first one on the left was what the top side of the rock said. And it says, Ananias Dare in Virginia went hence unto heaven 1591. Any Englishman showed John White, governor of Virginia. Okay, so this seems to imply that Ananias Dare, which was John White's son-in-law, and Virginia Dare, which would have been his granddaughter, died. And this stone was supposed to mark the place where they were buried. The other side, the flip side of it, tells like a really sad story, and you can see spelling was not really a thing. Back in the day, there was no technically wrong way to spell a word. You just kind of spelled it the way it sounded, because the dictionary had not been invented yet. So you could spell a word any way you wanted, and nobody could really prove that you had spelled it wrong. So it's a little bit difficult to read, but the kind of summary of it is that it looks like it's supposed to be a letter from EWD, which would have been the initials of John White's daughter, Virginia's mother, and Ananias's wife. And it is a letter to John White, apparently her father, saying that soon after you left for England, there's only been misery and war for 2 years. Half of us are dead. 2 more from sickness. 24 have died. The savages, which would be the natives, said that there was a ship that was coming, and we were afraid of like the Spanish coming to attack us. We didn't think it was you, so we ran and hid from them. Soon after, the natives started saying that the spirits were angry, and all of a sudden they murdered all of us except for 7. Her child and Ananias were slain with much misery, and she buried them all near 4 miles east of this river upon a small hill. Their names are written on a rock, and she's going to put this there also. The savages are supposed to show this to you. Anybody who does show this to you will get a great reward. Okay, and that's kind of the gist of what she's saying there. Some of the other theories, because again, we don't know if that stone is legit or not. If it is true, it tells a really sad story that most of the colonists were either killed by the natives or died from sickness, including that little baby Virginia. So that's one theory, but it's a very sad one. A different theory is that the colonists, just like things weren't working out, they would run out of food. John White still has not come back yet with all their supplies, and that they just kind of joined up with this other Native American tribe. Because many years later, the English settlers near this other island nearby called Croatoan, which you should kind of remember from that word that was carved into a tree, they found this tribe there called the Lumbee tribe. And these English explorers and these English settlers who met the tribe, and this was many, many years after Roanoke disappeared, described them as speaking perfect English, although they shouldn't be able to because supposedly nobody else from England has lived in this area. They have very European features. They're a lot paler than normal. A lot of them have blue eyes. And a lot of them have last names that sound like the settlers from Roanoke. Like they have a lot of the same last names. A lot of people think that these people are the descendants of the Croatoan and Roanoke survivors, and that after their colony kind of was failing, they decided to move further inland and settled along the banks of the Lumber River. And that's where this tribe kind of started. So this kind of seems to imply that the Europeans and the Croatan natives kind of merged together, and that's what happened to them, which is a much happier thought than having everybody die from sickness or being murdered. This seems to imply that they kind of just joined up with the natives and lived the rest of their lives that way. Another theory is that there was a secret fort that England wouldn't have wanted anybody else to know about, which is why there's almost no record of it. It would have been like top secret information. The reason why we think there might be some kind of a secret fort is because of this map here. Now, if you look in the middle of the map, there's something weird going on with the middle of it. And so historians who were examining this map noticed that there is something really weird going on with this middle of this map. And so they shined a light underneath the bottom of it, and that's where they could see underneath that little piece of paper that had just been glued over the top of something there was that symbol. And that symbol is typically used on a map to depict a fort. Okay? This is a map of St. Augustine. As you can tell, like, it looks very similar. This would have been how forts were built back in the day. It was a very popular style for building your fort. And so if there was a fort there, John White probably would have known about it, being the governor of this colony. And he probably would have told his daughter or somebody else that he trusted. So these people would have known that this fort was there if it does in fact exist. And that if they were in trouble, this might have been some place that they would go to where they could be protected. And in fact, historians have gone out to this area and have kind of gone around with metal detectors and radar and sonar and stuff like that to try to see, is there anything actually down there? And there is some kind of a structure underneath this hill, but we have yet to dig down there and see if it's actually there. Over the course of many, many years in a place called Mary Hill, North Carolina, which is very far away, they found all kinds of different pieces of ceramics and different gun parts and other artifacts. And so if that's to be believed, it would have been made in the same time period that the people from Roanoke would have been able to get a hold of this stuff. And so some people may think that maybe the colonists like split up into different groups and went different places. Maybe some of them stuck around with the Croatan. Maybe some of them ran to the fort. Maybe some of them just ran off and further into North Carolina. So maybe they split up. So maybe more than one of these theories is correct. Carrying on, this is just kind of a funny video about Roanoke, and I'll put a link to it in the description, so make sure if you want to go ahead and pause the video and watch that, you can. But I'm just going to keep going, because the next colony we're going to talk about is Jamestown, Virginia. This is the same Jamestown from the movie Pocahontas. So if you've seen that movie, it's a Disney animated movie. If you've seen it, you should be a little bit familiar with what we're going to talk about. Jamestown was attempt number 2 at an English colony. And if you remember, the first time Roanoke failed, Queen Elizabeth told Sir Walter Raleigh, if this doesn't work, I'm not paying for it anymore. You got to pay for it. You can make it all you want, but I'm not going to be paying for anything that's going into this new colony. And so because they lost so much money on Roanoke, not just once, but twice, they did not want to pay for any new colonies, and that's going to continue with all of the kings and queens after Elizabeth. They do not want to pay for any new colonies, just because there's such a high risk that maybe the entire thing will just disappear off the face of the earth, and that's kind of scary. So because many people still wanted to move to the New World, even though it was not going to be paid for by the king and queen, they started their own company called the Virginia Company. And this would be a business where different people could buy pieces of this colony. So they would claim like a really big area, like Virginia, which is why it's called the Virginia Company, and individual people could come in and buy huge chunks of the colony. And they would pay for the ships, and they would pay for the supplies and all that stuff. They would basically own that colony. And they brought, once they had kind of like raised enough money, they brought this to the king. And the king at this time is called King James, which is why it's going to be named Jamestown, because they were trying to do a little bit of kissing up to the king. He gave them what's called a charter. A charter would be a paper or a pamphlet. It would be a document that would grant them permission to start this new colony. It would often include things like advice and like recommendations, like if you're going to be building a colony, make sure you build something that you can defend, because sometimes the natives are really nice and sometimes they're not, so you never know. The Spanish are still not super thrilled with us. Don't build anything that's too close to the ocean, because if they sail by with their ships and they see you guys kind of all by yourselves out there, they might think that this would be an easy chance to attack you. So there would be all kinds of advice for like stuff to grow and when to grow it, things like that. Because most of the people who are moving here, most of the people who can afford to move here, are not typically people whose big area of expertise is farming. These people don't really know how to live outside. These are a bunch of rich boys who have lived in a big mansion and have never really had to do any work a day in their lives. So great people to start a colony with absolutely nothing from scratch. But they raised enough money to get 3 ships, and their names are the Discovery, the Godspeed, and the Susan Constant. And these 3 ships sailed off for Jamestown with 144 men on board. So they're doing what the first attempt at Roanoke was doing, where they're not going to bring families or women or kids or anything like that, because they want to kind of get things set up for them. They don't want to have like really small kids. They don't want to make their wives kind of like sleep on the ground outside with no protection. They want to get a house built. They want to get a farm started. They want to start making some money, and then they'll pay to bring the rest of their family over. And so there's a little game that you can do if you go to Google Classroom. There should be a link that says, how well would your colony do? And when you click on it, it's going to take you to a little game where you can try to play through and see if you were in charge of this colony of starting Jamestown, how well you would do. And at the end, it will kind of show you how you did, and it would kind of grade you, and it'll compare to what you did to what Jamestown in real life did. And you'll see if you did better or worse than their first attempts at starting a colony. Because again, most of these guys never really like had to be outside or have to survive outside. They live in these big houses, and most of them are pretty rich, because that was kind of the only way you could really afford to go, or at least one of the main ways. So you can go ahead and pause this video and do that if you'd like. So, some of you did pretty good, some of you did pretty bad, and if you get yourself promoted to governor, if you take a screenshot of that screen and send it to me, I'll give you some extra credit. Okay? But Jamestown, the location they picked, you can see on this map over here, was in kind of that Bay Marshy area. That's the area they picked for their colony. Now, there were pros and cons to this area. First pro, okay, it's on a peninsula. It kind of sticks out into the river, which means it's very easy to see people coming. If the Spanish are going to come and attack, you'll be able to see them from a ways away. The trees were kind of cleared out in this area, and so if anybody was going to come attack their settlement, they'd be able to see it coming. And then the James River is going to make it really easy to trade with Native Americans who live further inland. And so water is just a really nice way to transport stuff. You don't have to feed your boat like you would have to feed a horse. And typically boats can carry a lot more weight than a horse or a person could. So it's just faster and you can carry a lot more. So those are the pros. Here are the cons for their location. They picked a swamp. They picked a swamp to live in. And that swamp is full of mosquitoes, and those mosquitoes are full of malaria. So they're making people sick. Malaria gives you a really high fever to the point where you start hallucinating because your brain is kind of boiling inside of your head because it's just so hot. It gives you shakes, and it just makes you super disoriented. It's not great. It's to the point it makes you so sick that you can't even sit up in bed, like you're stuck laying down, like you're too weak to move. And then the drinking water is not great. It was this mix of salty and fresh water, and you're not really supposed to drink salt water. It's not great for you. So they didn't really have good drinking water. This river would also be the place where they would kind of, go to the bathroom. So it would get contaminated as well because it wouldn't flow out into the ocean. It would just kind of all sit there. So it was super gross. Go ahead and draw this pyramid here and fill it in as we go. This is kind of like who is the most important in this colony. So at the very tippy top, you have King James I of England. Everybody in the colony, no matter who you are, has to listen to whatever he tells you to do. Below him is the Virginia Company governor. This is the person who went to the Virginia Company and bought the land that Jamestown is going to be on. He literally owns the town. Underneath him is what's called the House of Burgesses. This is not the House of Burgers. This is not the original Burger King. This says House of Burgesses. This was kind of like what we would consider like the House of Representatives for this colony. It was a bunch of different people who were kind of chosen to write the laws of this colony, of this town, because they're very far away from the king. And of course they have to listen to the king, but they also are going to create some of their own laws that they can enforce here. Below them is every other white Jamestown man. And then at the very bottom were eventually women, indentured servants, and slaves. So let's talk about what indentured servants are. Most of the colonists who were here in Jamestown were indentured servants. An indentured servant was usually a poor white English person who would pay their way to the New World. They would go to someone who had a lot of money saying, hey, I want to go to the New World. I just don't have any money to do it. Will you pay for my trip? And this person would pay for them to get to the New World. And then the indentured servant would sign a contract with them saying that I'll work for you for the next 4 to 7 years, depending on the contract. That was usually about how long it would be, somewhere in between those two time periods. And in that time, whatever you make, a decent chunk of it would get sent back to the person you had signed the contract with. So you didn't really make any of your own money. Indentured servants tended not to work very great because you had a high chance of them running off and not completing the contract. And in a colony full of white guys, putting out a search warrant for another white guy didn't really get you anywhere. So this is what the colony would have looked like. It was inside of this wooden fort. So if you picked a wooden fort in your game, you did exactly what Jamestown did. You can see it has 3 points because that way you can really see who's coming. And it's just in this really marshy area. Now this is what it used to look like. And I say used to because it didn't take too long for stuff to start going wrong. You can see they built a trench around it, and then one day it just caught on fire. We're not really sure how the fire started, but the entire colony burned down, and they had to start completely over from scratch. And that was really frustrating because they had already worked so hard, and now they had to do the whole thing over. But now winter was a lot closer, and so they didn't know if they were going to be able to plant enough food, and this was made more difficult by the fact that Jamestown was mostly settled by people that we call gentlemen. Now, when we think about gentlemen today, we think about people who are very polite and very just nice, but gentlemen back then usually is used to refer to the second son of a wealthy English landowner. Now, the fact that they're the second son is very important because the first son, the oldest son in a family, is the one who is going to inherit everything from the dad. So when the dad dies, the house, the money, everything goes to the oldest son, and the youngest son gets nothing from the dad. So he kind of has to go out and make his own way before his dad dies, or else he's going to have no money. And so these guys were pretty motivated to go to the New World, and we're going to make money, but here's the thing, they've never had to work before, ever. They've never had to farm anything. They've never had to do any kind of labor. And so they're not really willing to do it. They're kind of lazy. They don't want to do anything. They don't think that they should have to do anything. Everybody should be doing things for them because that's who they are. They're very unwilling to work. And the person who finally makes them work is this guy who, if you've seen the movie Pocahontas, you should recognize. This is John Smith. So this is probably more what John Smith actually looked like. Disney kind of lied to you trying to make him look like this. This is probably more what he looked like. But he kind of takes control of Jamestown because the governor is a gentleman and he is not going to make any of his gentleman friends do work. So John Smith is very imposing and he kind of marches up to the governor and intimidates him into doing whatever John Smith says. Because John Smith knows, like, if we don't start working all together, all of us working, it doesn't seem really fair that we're doing all the work and you guys are getting all of the food. That doesn't seem right. So he makes a new rule. He says, if you don't work, you don't eat. And he enforces that rule. And the gentlemen really hate him for this. They hate that who does this guy think he is trying to make us do work and trying to keep us from getting food? That's not fair. But John Smith says, no, it's not fair that you're doing zero work and getting all of the food. So this is going to help Jamestown succeed for a while. Okay, it doesn't last forever. England keeps sending these new settlers without telling John Smith that these guys were coming. Okay, so he would have like enough houses built, and he'd have it planned out. Okay, we're going to grow this much food, and that'll be exactly enough for the amount of people that we have. And then another ship would show up and dump like another 50, 60, 70, 100 people on him, and he would have to try to find places for all these people to live and food for all these people, and he wouldn't know when these people were coming. They would just get dumped on him. And so there would be no planning. They wouldn't have anything available for these people, but you'd have to kind of scrounge something up for them. And then one day he gets injured. Now it's kind of iffy about how this happens. What we do know for sure is that he was in a canoe, and there was this little barrel of gunpowder, and somehow it exploded. He gets pretty badly injured, badly enough that since there are no doctors here in Jamestown, he needs to get sent back home to England to get some work done on him and to get fixed and to get healed. And I guess he decided, you know what? I got exploded. Nobody in that colony likes me. They're not doing any work. They're all going to starve to death. And you know what? I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I'm not going back to Jamestown. And so he never did. And the second he doesn't come back and the second he's gone, kind of like when mom leaves the house to go grocery shopping or something, and she tells you you need to do the dishes while she's gone by the time she gets back. You don't really start doing the dishes until she's in the driveway, right? And so all the settlers stopped working because John Smith was the only one who was making them work. And so now that he's gone, they're not going to do any work. And most of them are going to die from starvation. This period of time is called the starving time because about 80% or so are going to starve to death. The thing that ends up saving Jamestown, ironically, is not food, but tobacco. Tobacco gets introduced to Jamestown by a guy named John Rolfe. If you've seen the second Pocahontas movie, his name should be a little familiar too. This is going to become Jamestown's cash crop. A cash crop is a crop that you grow a whole bunch of in huge quantities. It means you grow a lot of it, and you can make a ton of money off of it. It's not hard to grow. You can grow a lot of it at once, and you are guaranteed to make money off of this thing because people in Europe really liked tobacco because they didn't know all the different side effects that can come from it. And there were other uses for tobacco too that were more medicinal. If they had a cow back in the day that kind of had an upset stomach or wasn't feeling great, they would feed it some tobacco, and that would kind of take care of any stomach problems the cow was having. Not so much for people, but for cows more than less. It was also really good for bruising. I once had a roommate when I was in college who, we lived in Utah, so they had these really deep and really skinny snow gutters. And it would be the place where the snow plows, when they pushed the snow off the road, they would just kind of shovel it into these snow gutters on the side of the road. They were probably about as wide as your pencil and about half a foot deep, probably closer to a foot. And so my roommate, she stepped out of her car and she stepped right into one of these snow gutters and her ankle twisted. And she almost broke it. She twisted it around so bad. It swelled up really fast and got really, like, literally black and blue bruises all over it. And she couldn't really walk on it. And so what we did to try to take the bruising down, because it wasn't broken, we tried icing it, and that helped a little bit, but it was bad. And so what we did is we got some straight tobacco leaves, like wet tobacco leaves, and we wrapped it with saran wrap around her ankle, and that helped take down the swelling and take out the bruising. And that helped her get better a lot faster. So there are a lot of different uses for this other than just the ones that kind of pop into your head. These plants were typically grown on what are called plantations, and we'll talk about those a lot more as we go throughout the year. But a plantation is a really big farm that grows mainly one thing. Like, they're not typically like farms that, like, well, we grow corn over here and tomatoes over here and potatoes over here. They are growing pretty much one thing, and it's acres and acres and acres and acres of this one thing. Because this is the thing that makes them money. They can just buy all the other food that they need. They don't need to grow anything else. And that's exactly what they did. So living in Jamestown kind of sounds like the worst. It's really marshy. You can get malaria. There are mosquitoes everywhere. Half the people, more than half of the people, don't want to work. 80% of the people died in the first winter, so why are people moving here? The reason why is because the Virginia Company is really good at advertising and they want to make money. And so they're going to use propaganda to convince people to move. Now, hopefully you guys talked about propaganda at least a little bit in civics. I'm being sarcastic. You talked about it a lot in civics. And we're going to talk about it a little bit today. So propaganda is the spreading of ideas and information to influence somebody's opinion. So things like advertisements are some of the most common forms of propaganda that you probably see in your day-to-day life. So you've probably seen this. This is just an example of propaganda. You've got Uncle Sam here. He's pointing at you. He says he wants you to enlist in the Army. This was something that came out in World War II to try to convince people to sign up to join the Army. This is another World War II propaganda poster. Because after all the guys went off to war, the only people who were left to fill all the jobs that they had left open were the women. So this was trying to convince them to say, hey, you can help your guys who were fighting off the war by taking over their job and just keep on making stuff in the factories. And this is kind of a propaganda ad trying to guilt you into saving gas by carpooling with other people because they need gas in the Army. So I'm going to show you guys a video. The link is in the description. And as this video is playing, this is a clip from the Disney movie Pocahontas. And there are subtitles for the song. It is a song, so I'm sorry, you'll have to listen to it. But they talk about a lot of different things that the Virginia Company would tell these guys to convince them to come over. And so some of this stuff you can tell pretty soon is going to be like exaggeration. Some of it's probably not true. But enough of these guys believed it that it was good enough to convince them to move to Jamestown. So just on a scrap of paper or in the margin of your notebook, I want you to jot down some of the stuff that you hear them say to convince people to move to Jamestown in this video. So go ahead and click on the description for that, or the link on that in the description. Alright, so hopefully you've watched the video, and you probably heard them talk about glory, God, and gold, which we know is probably more of a Spanish thing than an English thing. They had different reasons, but it is definitely this time period, and it was probably on the forefront of a lot of their minds. Finding gold especially, because Spain found a whole bunch of gold over here, so should we. They don't really understand that they're going to a different continent than Spain did, where Spain found all the gold. So the place they're going, not a ton of gold there, but they don't know that yet. They also talked about, like, there's so much gold there, like, you can just pick it off of every tree. The rivers are literally made out of silver. It's like heaven here. It's perfect. And those were the kind of things that the Virginia Company was telling people to convince them to move over here. So what you're going to do now is the Jamestown Propaganda poster assignment on Google Classroom. You're going to create a picture, a poster actually, and you can use pictures and images from Google image search and stuff like that. And the criteria for all of that is in the assignment. But you're going to be making a propaganda poster trying to convince people to move to Jamestown. And you can get as creative as you want with this. It's not due until the next day that you have my class. But make sure you start working on it. Go ahead and head over to Google Classroom and start working on that assignment now.